Well, hello everyone. This is the first video of a new channel that I am bringing to YouTube. This is the Ulster Gael talking. This is basically a fan channel that I want to bring to the masses, particularly the Ulster people. I'll get into some of my motivations for this as we go through this video. But I think we have a fantastic tradition of GAA in the north of this island, and sometimes I often feel that we don't get a fair representation at some stages, and sometimes, particularly with some of the more traditional media outlets. I'll not go into too much detail for liable reasons there, but we'll get into that a little bit more in the detail further on in. So I just want to welcome everyone that's taken the time out to listen to some of these videos. I'm going to try my best to try and create some good, strong content. At the moment, I'm looking into upgrading video footage and video facilities that I currently have. So everything's a little bit low key at the minute, but we'll hopefully start to upgrade the quality of some of these, some of the outputs in the coming weeks. So, what was my main motivation for creating this channel? Like I said in the first slide there, GAA in the north of this country, there's a fantastic amount of commitment and hard work and detail going into all levels of GAA in this part of the world. I do feel that some of it is maybe there's not as big a light shone upon it. I do feel that we get very poorly treated sometimes, particularly in some of the traditional GAA circles and some of the traditional GAA media outlets. Definitely over the last 20 years, I've been a very avid follower of all Ulster football, county and club level, more so county level, but I would follow a lot of club level. I've been season ticket holder for 10, 11 years. I've followed various different counties up and down the country and showed my support for the Ulster teams. There was definitely a very strong tradition, particularly in the 90s, of once your county went out of the Ulster Championship or went out of the All-Ireland series, you rode in behind the other counties that were still there from the north of the country. I find that this has been diluted a little since the 2000s, since the domination of the Ulster counties, particularly your Tyrones and Armaghs. So I want to try and generate that sentiment back again. I want to try and point out where some of particularly the traditional media outlets have tried to turn Ulster counties kind of against each other and tried to paint us as the big bad wolves from the north. So the first thing I've pointed out is definitely from the 2000s, from when Armagh and Tyrone really established themselves on the scene as counties that could dominate and really announce themselves at the top table. Prior to that, while there were Ulster counties that done well, and while Cavan dominated a little in the 40s and 50s, and then Down probably would have been the more dominant Ulster county in the 60s, and then again in the early 90s. There was a brief flurry of Ulster teams doing well in the early 90s. Again, it was a bit before my time supporting, so I'm not sure what the sentiment was like back then. But there very much was that sentiment, particularly in the late 90s when I became a staunch GAA supporter, that a lot of the traditional strong counties was like, the Ulster teams come down, they might win the odd All-Ireland, but they come down to Croke Park and roll over looking their bellies scratched. And then there was a huge amount of work, particularly in Tyrone, particularly in Armagh and Derry as well, where there was a huge emphasis put into underage structures to really set a strong foundation for GAA, a strong foundation for Gaelic football in this part of the world. And you started to see the fruits of that labour towards the late 90s and into the 2000s, Derry, Tyrone, Down, Armagh started to do very well at club football, club level, particularly with Crossmaglen announcing themselves on the scene. You had the underage success of Mickey Hart and that great Tyrone team. A lot of people, maybe particularly younger viewers, maybe that weren't maybe around in that era, thinks that great Tyrone team just announced themselves on the stage in 2003. But that Tyrone team was building from out of the ashes of that team from 95, 96. There was that minor team that had Stephen O'Neill, Kevin Hughes, Brian McGuigan, Owen Mulligan. Then Sean Kavanagh was in a team, I think it was slightly before that. You had the great Cormac McAnallen, God rest his soul. You had that. There's some very good underage Derry teams. You had Sean Marty Lockhart coming through, and the Bradley brothers, and they were very competitive. But then that translated into the early stages of the 2000s. You had a very, very strong Donegal team, and a Fermanagh team that done quite well in that era as well. Armagh and Tyrone then at senior level they were the first counties really in the north to really properly take preparation. Joe Kiernan, Mickey Hart, they brought that preparation, that belief, that's almost psychopathic drive to win that you see with Mayo now, that they haven't won in so long, they've lost so many finals. You can see that psychopathic hunger that those teams had in the 2000s, and anyone that grew up in that era can remember that. And that's when I think this anti-Ulster sentiment really started. You had the whole hullabaloo around the Gavin Devlin stamp in the 2003 league. You also had the sort of tough defensive football from Armagh in 2002, and Tyrone took that on to another level then, and you had the whole puke football comments, and if Brian Dooher wins in All-Ireland with Tyrone, that I will eat my hat. Those sort of comments kind of came through. And then sort of towards the mid-2000s, that all kind of settled a little bit. You had that fantastic All-Ireland final in 2005 that went down for the ages. And then you still had strong Donegal teams. You had a strong Fermanagh team that almost got to an All-Ireland final. You had a Derry team got to an All-Ireland final. And then around 2008, 2007, 2008, you sort of started to see that change again when Tyrone really hammered a Dublin team out of the park in the 2008 quarter-final. There was a lot of this talk about Ulster football so far ahead, and it's not fair on other counties, started to creep in then. Then obviously Tyrone and Armagh sort of started to, that team kind of came to their natural end towards the end of the 2000s. Then you had a strong Donegal Monaghan team come on. Donegal, Jim McGuinness came in, basically brought in that massive shift towards more defensive zonal marking almost. And that first year that he came in, there was a lot of anti-Donegal talk in the media. Probably some of, again, you can see in my point there's no smoke without fire. Some of it was probably deserved, maybe it wasn't maybe traditionally as attractive football, but it was still very fascinating. It took a lot of discipline, took a lot of fitness, and there was definitely elements in that. It brought the levels of fitness of the game on to another level. I do genuinely think you wouldn't have got that fantastic Dublin team that we've seen in the 2010s if it wasn't for Donegal and Monaghan and Tyrone to a lesser extent, bringing that defensive structure, that defensive standards and the fitness levels that Ulster football brought to GAA. They started that professional outlook then with obviously the backing, the financial backing, and that great squad of players that Dublin had in the 2000s. They brought that all to another level. In the 2010s, when Tyrone looked like they were sort of maybe sneaking back, Donegal, they got that puke football, defensive football. Then Cavan got it as well. The Black Death coming from the north. Then you had the cynicism of Sean Cavanagh's tackle when, when every footballer in Ireland come out and says that they would have done exactly the same thing in exactly the same situation, and that permeates through the entirety of football. You had the dirty tackles. The Ulster teams were significantly dirtier than everyone else. There was a great stat that I remember coming out in the Gaelic Life about 10 years ago, where they took 4-game averages from every team that played in Omagh during the National League, and the most cynical team averaged across 4 games in Omagh was Kerry. Were they labelled a dirty defensive team? No, it was. They're becoming savvy. They're responding to this. That they were, they were being cute. Typical cute Kerry Hoorers in the game. Was what the sentiment was. But when Tyrone, Donegal, Monaghan, Cavan, Derry played that way, it wasn't mentioned. Derry had an absolute defensive master. I'm going back in time a wee bit again here. When Tyrone were All-Ireland, defending All-Ireland champions in 2004, Derry had a Herculean defensive action against Tyrone in the first round of the championship. And a certain pundit, which I'll not mention by name, hailed it as a great triumph of Derry football. It was 15 men behind the ball for parts. Real tough, tough, hard football. It was maybe, if you transported that game into the 2010s, it wouldn't have looked out of place. It was a massive achievement for Derry football at the time. Kudos to them. I thought it was a fantastic game of football. And they really showed up weaknesses in the Tyrone game. But again, the traditional media this was a great defensive, well-structured Herculean attempt to beat Tyrone. Cavan played very similar football. They got called the Black Death. Armagh played similar, tough football. Was dirty football. Tyrone played defensive football to try and compete with Donegal and Ulster. It was seen as cynical, dirty football. Donegal again got similar. They got similar accusations compelled against them as well. So while it seemed that Southern team, like the great Dublin team, played defensive screens as well during their glory days, seen as great football, they were seen as the saviours of Gaelic games. The same with Kerry, they were seen as hailed as these glorious saviours of Gaelic football. But all teams of that era played the same type of football. Mayo played a very similar style, a running based, clog the middle kind of football. It was great entertainment to watch these games. And maybe you didn't have the traditional attractive football that you would have seen in the mid-2000s going back into the 90s. You wouldn't have seen that football. But there were also very entertaining games. I was at the Ulster final in 2016 between Tyrone and Donegal. And the atmosphere in that game, the tension on the sideline, the tension in the stands, it made for absolutely absorbing viewing. Now, it might have been as absorbing viewing on the TV. But when we were there, and the release and the joy that came from when Tyrone got over the line, 2 monster points, one from Peter Hart, one from Sean Kavanagh. Donegal probably should have won that game, in my opinion. They had the better of the play. They won midfield. But Tyrone got over the line, and then Tyrone tweaked their game the following season, beat Donegal well. Again, there was an article in the Gaelic Life. I can't remember the author of the article now, but it was basically, he went into the tactical breakdown of how Tyrone dismantled the Donegal juggernaut that they couldn't get on top of for the previous 5 years. And he was seeing it as this was the future of Gaelic football. But again, that was from the non-traditional Ulster media, have been looking at the actual games and looking at everything from a from a perspective of fairness, and I don't think we always get that from the um, traditional GAA media outlets. I think this was and leading on to the more modern day, in the last sort of 5-10 years, I think this is bleeding into the general public's view of Ulster football. On modern day outlets like Twitter, like Facebook, I put in the point there, the Fossa Stewartstown game. Now that was a very dirty game of football, but to me that level of tackles, that level of brute force that's in the game in that match is indicative of junior football across the country. I've watched junior football in Louth, I've watched junior football in Waterford, I've watched junior football in Mayo, I've watched a lot of junior football in Antrim, and I've watched a lot of junior football in Tyrone as well, from various times living in those parts of the world. And that's indicative of junior and even intermediate football, that you do get very old school tackles in the game. Now, I'm by no means justifying what either the Fossa or the Stewartstown players did on the day, and as far as I was concerned, the red cards were justified. I do think that the elbow from the Stewartstown player, if he did that on the street and it was caught on camera, you probably would be cited and referred to the prosecution service. So it's a red card, and I think it should have been dealt with, probably with a fairly long-term ban. I've heard a lot of debate over Paddy Clifford's interference with the face, as I refer to it. It wasn't what you would call a full traditional eye gouge, but he clearly catches the Stewartstown player in the face and makes a gripping motion. And he's not doing that to fix his hair, in my opinion. And that incident alone, to me, basically encapsulates this different view of these incidences. Now, both incidences that I'm about to reference here is one, the Paddy Clifford incidents from the other weekend, where there's clearly an interference with the face, there's clearly a grasping motion. I would refer it back to the Tyrone player, what's his name? That was done for an eye gouge. It was a more clear-cut one. Tiernan McCann, that was the player's name. Again, I'm by no means saying that Tiernan McCann should have got off with his eye gouge. It was a horrific incident. It was a rush of the blood to the head moment. I'm pretty sure if you asked both Paddy Clifford and the Stewartstown player and Tiernan McCann, they probably massively regretted what they'd done once they walked off the pitch. I'm sure it's not in their day-to-day characteristics, but we've all played Gaelic football at some level of our careers. We all know what it's like in a heated, combative environment. We do stupid and silly things, but the point I'm making is, when Tiernan McCann did it, they were calling for a 1-year ban. It was discussed on every media outlet, the disgust of this, and it was again referred to as the big bad wolves from Tyrone, the dirty, cynical football that's bred into Tyrone players. But yet Paddy Clifford does it, and there's not a single word on the media. Not only that, but he actually did that and said in his acceptance speech that he didn't know why he was sent off. If that was an Ulster player, and he did that, they would be, the traditional media will be calling from the rooftops for his head. Again, going back to the Sean Kavanagh incident, massively influenced Tyrone's run in the championship that year. I'm pretty sure that's happened. If I went back through that season, I'm pretty sure there's probably loads of incidences of that happening. So that's one of the reasons why I want to kind of put this. We have a massive tradition of GAA in this country. We have a massive tradition of Ulster football. It's hard, yes, it's hard. It goes across the line at times. Yes, that should be called out. Yes, that should be pointed out when teams cross any line. and any team should be open to criticism. But I want to balance the books here. I want to make it fair. I want to make it that we look at things that if Kerry play in a defensive, ugly manner, that it's called out the same way that if Fermanagh or Antrim or Tyrone or Derry play the same way. Moving on a slightly more positive note, Ulster setups. Across the last 10-15 years, every county in Ulster either has or have been making moves towards putting in state-of-the-art facilities, state-of-the-art coaching facilities, coaches. We look at Garvaghy and Tyrone, Premier Leagues. They wouldn't look out of place in any Premier League club in England. We have Owen Begg, again. It's got its own stand at it. It's got training facilities. It's got its state-of-the-art gyms. I think a lot of these places now are putting in state-of-the-art statistical analysis suites. You've got one in Monaghan. You've got one in Donegal. I think Down have put in their planning permission for their state-of-the-art training facility as well. Not sure about Cavan. Not sure about Fermanagh. I'm sure there's something either there or in the works. Antrim does have the dub through Queen's, so again a state-of-the-art facility there that they can use. So yeah, we have great county facilities. We've got great county stadiums. If you comparatively speaking to a lot of other provinces, you look at some of the county grounds in Leinster, way behind the ages. Outside of Galway and Mayo, the standard of grounds I think definitely falls off significantly in Connacht. Now there are some very strong stadiums and very strong grounds in Munster, but I think that's more across the back of the sweat of hurling. The blood, sweat and tears of hurling probably have that in place more so than the efforts of the footballing community down there. And then obviously, you've got Croke Park, covers up a lot of the sins in Leinster. I suppose you've got Portlaoise there as well, which is a pretty good stadium. Wexford have a pretty decent ground. Carlow have a pretty decent ground now as well. But you've some other big and Longford as well actually have a very good stadium. But you've got some other big powerhouse counties there, like Meath. The facilities in Meath are way behind the years. Wicklow and some of these other places, they're just not up. When you compare Wicklow to Fermanagh, obviously we've got Antrim up here and the whole Casement Park debacle, which is maybe Antrim's probably the one county that's maybe a wee bit behind everywhere else in Ulster, but if we could get a government working, maybe that might change. Across the board, we've got fantastic club facilities. There's fantastic club facilities in Derry. There's fantastic club facilities in Tyrone, Donegal. Fermanagh really stepping along. There's some very good club communities in Portland Owens, very good. You've got a lot of very strong club facilities and a very good club tradition in the Ulster football. We're starting to stamp out a lot of the ugliness, particularly in the likes of your Tyrones and your Derrys. Definitely the standard of club football right down to junior, standard of preparedness, definitely getting better. There's a great balance between senior, intermediate and junior clubs. Ulster clubs have competed at an All-Ireland stage for the last 20 years. You had the great Cross-Maglen teams at senior level. You have the Glen team at the minute that's currently competing very well. You had that other Derry team for the last couple of years, Slough-Neil. They've competed at both hurling and some of the Antrim hurling and football. You've got some of the Antrim hurling teams that have always competed very well. Dunloy. Tyrone have done very well at intermediate level over the years. They've had quite a few intermediate and junior All-Irelands. So you had Galway in it this year. You had Stewartstown in it this year. Derry Loughlin, I think, have got the intermediate finals. Cookstown won a couple of junior or intermediate All-Irelands. So the Rock won a junior All-Ireland in the last 10 years. So the standard of club football in Ulster is very, very good. Generally, we have quite a few, all our universities compete at a strong level. Obviously, you have UUJ, you have Queen's, and you have St Mary's that compete at Sigerson level. You also have like Coleraine McGee have done quite well at Trench Cup level as well, at various stages over the last 10-15 years. So again, we have very good facilities there. We have a very good history of breeding very strong young players. And we have I may be a bit biased here, but I think we've won the McCrory Cup football right down McLaren, down through the levels. Very competitive Ulster football. I know the vocational schools now have now crossed over into the colleges football, but again we had a very strong vocational schools over the years. We had, Ballagolly did very well at vocational schools. Cookstown did very well. You had some very good, strong, and they've a lot of history of good club players, good county players, teaching, coaching in schools. So we have an awful lot, despite what a lot of the media outlets have said about Ulster football over the years, we have an awful lot to be proud of in this province, and we have an awful lot of positives that come out of our football setups. Despite what people say, the standard of football and the quality of footballers that we have are as good as the Kerrys and the Dublins and the Galways of the world. So, and I do think we have a bright 10 years. I'm going to be putting up a video after tonight's McKenna Cup final on the McKenna Cup, and I'm very impressed with the standard of football at McKenna Cup level. I always enjoyed the McKenna Cup. I love watching the McKenna Cup. Great seeing the young players trying to break through. And I think the standard of Ulster football is at a very, very high level at the minute. This leads me on into the league split and the quality of football at this level. Like, we have 4 teams in Division 1: Armagh, Donegal, Monaghan and Tyrone. Armagh being the new kids breaking back through on the block. You have Donegal and Monaghan that have been, and Tyrone, Donegal and Monaghan and Tyrone that have been mainstays in Division 1, Division 2 football over the last 15-20 years. In Division 2, you have Derry, the big team on the rise. It's going to be tough for them to get out of Division 2 this year, with Dublin there. I also fancy the look of Kildare this year as well. I think there's a good strong panel there with a good nucleus in Kildare. So it's going to be tough for Derry to get up into Division 1. Plus, I also think there's a good chance, either one off Donegal, Monaghan, Tyrone and Armagh will definitely go down this year. Tyrone historically always start the league quite slowly. Monaghan and Donegal, both teams quite heavily in transition at the minute. I think Donegal probably are the ones most at risk of going down. Armagh, again, if they have a poor start, could be up against it as well. So I do think there could be 1 or 2 of them possibly drop down into Division 2. But still, the quality and the standard of Division 1 and Division 2 over the last 5-10 years has been very, very strong. Dropping down into Division 3, we have 4 teams there as well. We have Antrim, which I think will probably struggle a little bit in Division 4 this year. We have Cavan and Down, who I think should be the 2 front runners, along with maybe Tipperary possibly, to go up. And then you have Fermanagh in there as well, who I've been very impressed with in the McKenna Cup. And a great statement of Ulster football is we don't have any teams in Division 4. Now I think of Antrim, again, new manager, new nucleus of very young and experienced players. They could find it tough in Division 3 this year and possibly could drop down. But they were competitive against Cavan in the McKenna Cup, so who knows? A couple more weeks training, a couple more weeks cohesiveness, maybe a couple more weeks of Andy McEntee trying to get his ideas across might change. But again, we have a fantastic history, a fantastic tradition of GAA. I think there's definitely a couple of teams in there, if they don't make senior football, I'm mainly speaking of Cavan and Down, if they don't make senior football this year in the All-Ireland group stage, definitely are my tips and hot contenders for the Tailteann Cup this year as well. So the summary, this is a fan channel to support our boys in Ulster and all the great work that we do. And we want to support Ulster. So we want to try and reinstitute the tradition of once your county goes out of the championship, we row in behind the Ulster boys, because we don't get a fair crack at the whip, I think. I will do further videos in the future where I think the system's stacked against Ulster teams. I want to celebrate the fantastic work been done in the province. So much good work been done. The great style of football, the great kicking. There's a lot more kicking football. If you listen to the traditional media, you'd think that Ulster football, all they do is hand pass and run and take people out. There's a fantastic tradition of football, some great midfielding, great midfield play being played, some great kicking football into the full forward line. Definitely seen a lot more of that in the McKenna Cup this year as well. And I want to really counter the sentiment and really call it out anytime it happens in the near future of the traditional media when it dips into an unfair criticism and that rhetoric that Ulster teams get. And then just discuss important issues that affect fans in the GAA, particularly Ulster, but across the board in the full country. The club versus county argument, the burnout of young players that play Sigerson Cup club football and county football at the same time, and so on. So thank you very much for listening. If you like what you hear, give us a follow, give us a like, and let's see where we can take this channel. So thank you very much for your time, and have a lovely evening, and enjoy the McKenna Cup final.